My name is Charlotte. I'm Program Director with Farm Aid. I'm here along with many of our partners who you'll hear from to get this useful information out to you. I want to thank you all for joining and also shout out all of our partners who are here from FLAG, NSAC, Land Loss Prevention Project, Rural Coalition, National Family Farm Coalition, and so many more. So grateful for all your participation and all of your work to get this information out to as many people as possible, because we know oftentimes that just a simple lack of access to information is one of the biggest hindrances to getting the services and support that so many of our farmers need. So we're very grateful for that. I do want to shout out Carmen with Bilingual Translation Services. If you are in need of those services, you can just click on the interpretation icon at the very bottom of your screen and then select the language. So I hope I did my due diligence there, and there's nothing else you have to do. That hopefully that'll work just fine for folks who need it. If not, please you can DM Carmen directly and maybe she can advise a little bit more on how to do that. All right, so without further ado, let's get to the task at hand. Y'all came here for a reason, not to listen to me. There's folks way smarter than me on this call right now that you're about to hear from. So I want to pass it over to our friends at FLAG. Let Lindsay and Stephen take it from here. Oh, I just wanted to also say, if you have questions as the information is being shared, feel free to put those in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we can acknowledge those. Okay. All right. Y'all take it away. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hi, I'm Stephen Carpenter. I'm at Farmers Legal Action Group, or FLAG. I'm here with my colleague, Lindsay Keene. And what we're going to try to do is summarize briefly the requirements for ERP2, as we're going to call it, as most people are calling it. And we have two things that I guess we should add to that. One is, feel free to ask questions. We're here for questions, and even if we don't know the answer, we will look it up. And second of all, we just published, it's on our website right now, and and I mean in the last like half hour, our Farmer's Guide to ERP2, and it's a long, detailed, but hopefully accessible discussion of all the requirements for this program and how it works and how the payments work. It's from a farmer's perspective. I mean, we're not FSA, and we don't have an opinion of whether you should do this program or not. We just think it's really important that you understand how it works, and so we try to lay that out. I will warn you, it's dry as dust, but it's really accurate, and it's really from a farmer's point of view. And if for farmers and advocates, we hope that you can really dig into it and figure out what the rules are, not what somebody says in a local office or what somebody told you. We have also a little bit of a discussion about appeals, about discrimination, some of the things that might confront you when you try to use the program. And we're happy to talk about those questions too, if that's something that you're interested in. So this guide is, of course, for free. You can download it. It will be around on other people's websites too, I suspect, and it will always be at the FLAG website. And so just briefly, we're a nonprofit law firm that works on behalf of family farmers. One of the things that we do most often is work with really groovy grassroots farm organizations like the ones represented here. It's a privilege to be able to work with the folks at those organizations. And we try to write a lot of good materials like what we're talking about right now. So let's get started. USDA programs tend to have weird names and weird acronyms. This one, ranks pretty high on that. We're ERP2. I just don't even know what to say. Like that's a USDA program for farmers. Like, oh yeah, sure. So what's the story here, and why are we taking the effort to talk about this? Essentially, ERP is a big disaster program, and the first phase, with a lot of money. The first phase of it basically went to people who already do crop insurance or already have done disaster programs with USDA in the past. And, you know, God bless those people. They're all farmers. They all had disasters. But it is really pretty much the usual suspects for USDA programs. It's the people where the programs really work well for them. And, you know, not to pick on anybody, but if you're a soybean and corn farmer in the Midwest, these programs were really sort of perfectly suited for you. And that includes ERP1. And as the groups on this call have been pointing out for a very long time, USDA disaster programs and federal crop insurance does a really poor job of helping people that have diversified farm operations, that raise specialty crops, that raise food, you know, not grain for hogs, that market directly and therefore get a premium on a ear of corn, that maybe are organic. Or you can just sort of go down the line, and especially diversification is really a tough one for USDA to handle in terms of trying to do right by folks that suffer a disaster. And so this emergency relief program, phase 2, if we want to be technical, ERP2, is designed to get after that problem and provide some help for people that suffer disasters in 2020 and 2021 that don't normally fit into the USDA programs. And so that's why we care so much about this program, and that's why we're, you know, everybody's here trying to explain it and understand it. The first thing I want to say about the program, though, is that we've got a deadline coming up. It's June 2nd. You need to have your stuff in by then. I know that's just around the corner. You know, in some ways, this program is fairly direct. In other ways, it can feel complicated sometimes because what they're trying to get at is your loss of revenue due to disasters in these 2 years. And so that's what we're talking about today, but keep in mind, you've got a deadline coming up. And with that, let's talk about some of the specifics here. Who's eligible for the program? So you can talk first about eligible farmers. And so as with most USDA programs, you can be a person, you can be a legal entity like an LLC or a corporation, that's fine. But you need to have an ownership interest in the crop that failed. In other words, this is not for people that do custom work. You know, it needs to be your crop that was lost, that you need to be the one doing the farming. And also, it needs to be what USDA calls a commercial marketed crop. In other words, it's not for losses for things that you grew for your own family. It's for things that they would like to think of it as things that you intended to sell or that usually sell. And I know we have people, especially in urban areas, really trying to provide for their own communities. If you get, you know, prevented by USDA from trying to do that in this program, we'd be interested in hearing from you. I mean, to me, you're going to be eligible here if you distribute, if the food gets distributed in a marketable way within your community or otherwise. So that's part of the rules, and that's something we have to negotiate here. So it's not for your garden for yourself. It is for things that are sold. So we have 3 kinds of crops here, just to boil it down. The USDA creates these 3 categories, and they sound very strange, but the thing you have to remember is this is a program for people who mainly didn't use the other ERP program, ERP Phase 1, and that was, you know, the vast bulk of corn, soybeans, cotton, etc. So these categories are kind of everybody else, and there are 3. One is specialty crops. And specialty crops means what, you know, we often think of it as meaning fruits, vegetables, nuts, etc. It's your normal line of specialty crops. And when Lindsay and I have talked about this before, we've, you know, there have been people ask us if specific things are eligible. Fortunately, there's a very long list that USDA published, and we can kind of say yes or no. The second category is what the USDA is calling high value crops. And so that can be something that's actually kind of a common crop, let's just say corn, but you do something special with it. Like you grow not just corn, but sweet corn, and you sell it through a CSA. That's a high value crop. So is organic production. Anything that's sort of identity protected that gives you a higher market price than would normally be the case for that crop. I'm boiling it down, but that's the essence. And then they have another category called other crops. And there's kind of a funny long definition, but basically it's kind of the other things that people would be growing and selling. Most of the time, those crops would have been gone through ERP1, but if it's sort of a leftover group, it's probably going to go into what USDA is calling an other crop in ERP2. So what's not eligible, what's left out of this list? Grazing crops. If you grew grass or other kinds of forage and it's just for your cattle to eat or whatever you have out there grazing, that's not eligible. It needs to be something that you are going to sell. A lot of people ask about aquatic crops. And again, it can be kind of a technical thing, but if you're a commercial fisher person, no. For you to qualify, you have to be doing some sort of aquaculture where you are actively raising aquatic life that's for consumption by either human beings or other animals. So aquaculture in general is in all kinds of things. But if you get outside of sort of like cultivation and water, you're probably not eligible. Again, you've got a specific question, we can look it up. Cannabis is out, no surprise there. Timber crops are out, and any kind of livestock. This is not the place to go if you've got livestock production. There are other programs at USDA that are actually fairly decent that help you if you had a drought or other disaster with livestock. So to get to the real nitty-gritty, the basics of this program are going to be what's your normal revenue and how much was that revenue reduced because of the disasters in 2020 and 2021. And your baseline is going to be some combination of 2018 and 2019. Sounds simple to say, it's going to be complicated. And so that's why Lindsay has that, because she'll talk about that. It's the complicated part. We said that the disaster has to cause your crop loss. There's a good, long, horrible list of disasters that can strike. You know, it's like the apocalypse has come. Drought, heat, rain, hurricane, temperature. It's a pretty good list of the things that hit people that are disasters that can need to have caused the loss of your crops or of your sales of your crop. Not COVID itself, it's got to be a disaster. It's like something has to have struck you. They do have an interesting little rule where it can be what they call a related condition. So you may not have been hit directly by the hurricane, but there were spin-off storms from the hurricane that included tornadoes that hit you. If you have issues with that, take a close look at our guide. It really spells out, you know, who's in and who's out in a farmer viewpoint way. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and before I turn it over to Lindsay, is what USDA is calling the linkage requirement. And so as we were saying earlier, what's good and interesting about this program is it's for people that haven't in the past tended to use USDA disaster programs or federally subsidized crop insurance. However, and here's the big catch that's, you know, causing a lot of consternation, and rightly so. You're going to have to piece this one together for your own farming operation. It's a linkage requirement. And what it means is if you sign up for this program, you're going to have to promise to buy crop insurance or something like crop insurance for the next 2 years for any crop that you grow that you used as the basis for the disaster in this program. So let's say you say that you had a big loss to your sweet corn crop. If you get money through ERP2 because of your loss of sweet corn because of the drought, you have to buy crop insurance for the next 2 years for your sweet corn if it's available in your county. So let's break that down just a second. If it's not available, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy crop insurance for everything you grow. It only has to be for things that caused losses that you got ERP2 money for. If the only thing you got money for was sweet corn, that's all you have to to get crop insurance for. And if you don't raise sweet corn in the next 2 years, you don't have to buy the crop insurance. Or if you quit farming, obviously, you don't have to buy it. But if you're going to grow the same crop, you're going to have to think about what it means down the road to get crop insurance. And it's not just the cheap catastrophic crop insurance, it's 6,100 coverage. Again, our guide kind of spells that out. If the crop insurance is not available in your county for that crop, you have to try to get NAP, Non-Insured Disaster Assistance Program. That's a USDA program. It doesn't have a terrific reputation because of its complexity, and it can just feel hard to use, but it can be useful for people. If crop insurance is not available, again, let's go back to our sweet corn. You have to try to get NAP coverage for your sweet corn the next 2 years. If that's not available, you have to try to get what is called whole farm revenue. And this is a unique and not well used, or not often used, form of crop insurance where you buy crop insurance and it covers all of your revenue from the farm. And Lindsay and some of the people in this call have worked on whole farm before. We're afraid that if people ever have to buy whole farm revenue, they may have a tough time finding somebody to sell it to them, because the crop insurance providers, the sellers, don't like it very much. It's too confusing for them. They're making a lot of money on regular crop insurance. I'm hoping I'm not hurting anybody's feelings. But it may be hard to get. If it is hard to get for you, send us an email or call us. We'd be interested in trying to help you negotiate through that. So the short lesson of linkage is you need to think about what it would mean to get this crop insurance for 2 years and balance that with with what you get from the program. So I think I've gone long. I am now, though, handing over to Lindsay. Lindsay, go for it.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. That was a good segue. What I'm going to try to do, Stephen covered in essence who is eligible, what crops are eligible, what disasters count. And what I'm going to do my best to make simple is to give you a sense of what the actual phase 2 payment looks like. So you can decide if this is a program that is worth trying to apply for in the next couple of weeks. So there are a couple things I want to point out first, because although I think on one level the program is easy to understand in that it's trying to compensate farmers for losses in revenue because of a disaster, the way the program works, there are a few quirks that make it a little more complicated. So one thing is that it appears that FSA might have been concerned about running out of money. So there are a couple of things about the way the payments are structured that are intended to address that. And so this program does not have unlimited funding. It has a cap. And so what FSA decided to do is, rather than have everyone apply and just give you one payment for what you would qualify for if there was unlimited money, what FSA is doing is they're actually doing the payments in 2 installments. So initially, if you apply and you're eligible, you are going to receive either $2,000 or your maximum phase 2 payment if it is less than $2,000. So for example, let's say you applied and you would be eligible to receive a $10,000 payment for phase 2. In the first installment, you would only receive $2,000. And then at a later date, after the deadline ends, when FSA is able to determine if it has enough money to pay out everyone in full, it will then decide whether it, yes, can pay you that remaining $8,000 in full, or whether it needs to prorate everyone's payments just to, I think in essence, try to be fair in some way and make this not a first come, first served program. So that's the first thing. So, but I guess I should say, if you were to apply for phase 2 and your total payment was only going to be $1,800, then you would get that entire amount in one go initially because it's under $2,000. So there's the 2 installments, and then how FSA is calculating the payment is it requires that the farmer select what they're calling a benchmark year. And this is supposed to be like your typical year of revenue on your farm. And I'll kind of define that in a minute, but I just want to give you the overview of the payment calculation. So you're going to take a typical year's revenue, and then FSA is going to reduce that by what it's calling an ERP factor. This is just a term that they're using, but by statute, it's a 70% factor. So what happens is FSA will take your typical year revenue and they will multiply it by 70%. And then from that number, they will reduce the revenue from your disaster year. So this is not a program that's intended to make farmers whole for the loss from a disaster. So that's just something good to keep in mind. So in essence, it's your typical year. They multiply that by 70% and then subtract that disaster year revenue. And then the only other thing I think that's important to understand with the overall payment calculation is that from that, if you're a farmer who was able to receive any payment from, say, the CFAP program or some of the other COVID time programs, FSA will subtract those payments from the phase 2 payment as well. So now I want to dive a little bit more into some of the terminology because I think it ends up being very important. So to begin with, as you probably have caught on, this program really relies on an understanding of what your revenue is. And so the terminology that the program uses is your allowable gross revenue. And there's a couple things I think about this that make it unique when compared to other disaster programs. So obviously, the sales of any crops that you have, that's going to count as revenue. That's pretty typical. But ERP Phase 2 will also allow you to include value-added products as long as you raised the underlying crop. So an easy example is if you grow strawberries and you turn that into jam and you want to sell, or you sell that jam at a farmer's market, when you are calculating your allowable revenue for this application, you can use the sales of the jam, not just the strawberries. And then finally, the program allows, if you're someone where, let's say you buy 4-inch plants and then you grow them and sell them at 18-inch pots, that would also count for this. So you could use that as your allowable gross revenue. And I think for those of you out there who use a Schedule F, you don't have to use a Schedule F to apply for this program. I want to make that very clear. But if you do, the ERP Phase 2 application often refers, when it's discussing what exactly counts as allowable gross revenue, it will often refer to the line on a Schedule F that corresponds to that. So it can be a useful thing in making it easier for you to kind of figure out as you're determining what your allowable gross revenue is for your benchmark and disaster years. And so that, what exactly are your benchmark and disaster years? So your benchmark year for this program generally has to be either 2018 or 2019. So when you apply, you get to decide, does 2018 more accurately represents, the revenue I get on my farm, or does 2019? And you can choose either of those years. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, what if I didn't start farming until 2020? And if that's the case, that's still okay. You can still be eligible for the program. The way it is set up, there's just a few additional rules, but they allow you to create what the program calls an adjusted benchmark year. So if you were not farming, so if you're a beginning or a new farmer and you were not farming in 2018 or 2019, just know that you can still be eligible. Our guide describes in detail what that looks like if you have questions on that. But it's also important to know, if you're a farmer that, let's say you were farming in 2018, but since then you had to sell some of your land. So if 2018 no longer reflects your typical revenue, or Conversely, maybe you have doubled the size of your property since then. Again, there is a way for you to adjust that typical year to better represent what it might look like today. So that's for the benchmark year. So 2018 or 2019, or an adjusted one if you are a newer beginning farmer, or if you had a shift in the size of your farm. And then the other question becomes, what is your disaster year? So if you remember, you first look at that benchmark, that typical year, and then you're taking away from that the revenue in the disaster year. So in general, this program only provides payments for disasters that occurred in calendar year 2020 or calendar year 2021. However, as all of you who are farmers know, it is sometimes the case where you might plant a crop in the fall, but not harvest or sell it until the following year. So if you are a farmer who falls into that category, you can actually choose which year to use for your disaster year revenue. So as long as the disaster itself happened in 2020 or 2021, you can decide which year best represents when you actually receive the revenue from that crop. So for example, if you planted a winter wheat in the fall of 2021, and then there was, let's say, a drought in that fall, and then it wasn't until 2022 that you felt the loss of that, you can use 2022 as the year in which you record your revenue. And I realize some of this, please ask questions if I am not making it clear. We are happy to answer that. So those are kind of the big terms and the big, I guess, amounts you're going to have to put on the application. And I'll just briefly, we're kind of getting towards time. I want to briefly talk about the application itself, because I think one of the things that is a bit unique about this is that it's a self-certification application. So what that means is when you apply, you are just saying kind of essentially not under oath, but you're certifying that, yes, I had this much revenue in 2018, and then after a disaster in 2020, I had this much revenue. So right off the bat, FSA is not going to require that you provide documentation of that. Instead, you are just going to fill in a box that says your total revenue, all of that allowable gross revenue from that benchmark year. You're going to fill in a box that asks for your allowable gross revenue for the disaster year. And you put that number there, and you don't have to send in documentation right away to demonstrate that. But it is important that you know that if FSA has a question on it, and it's not exactly clear, there's rules regarding when they can ask for documentation or not, but if they have reason to question the numbers you put, they can ask you to provide documentation. So again, it's not something you are required to submit with the application, but it is something you should be prepared to have in case they do ask you for it. And with the application, there are two forms that you have to turn in. And right now, I guess it would be by June 2nd. So the first is that application itself, and that's where you're putting your revenue. And the second is what's called a linkage agreement. And that's referring to what Stephen was mentioning with the agreement that you are going to get crop insurance for those crops that were directly affected by a disaster. So only those crops, but you do sign an agreement that you will do that for the following 2 years. So those are the two forms that have to be submitted by June 2nd. And then there are a few additional forms, 3 to 4, but you have 60 additional days to submit those. So again, by June 2nd, it's the application itself and that crop insurance agreement form. And then after that, you will have 60 days to either provide to FSA for the first time, or if you're a farmer who's worked with USDA or FSA in the past, you might not have to resubmit some of these forms. But one of them is a conservation compliance form. It's a form that's required for most USDA programs that just kind of says you're not farming on wetlands, or highly erodible land. The other is what's called a farm operating plan. So again, if you have one on file with FSA, you won't necessarily have to submit a new one. The third is if you are applying as an entity, there is a member information and legal entity form where you just have to provide information on the entity. And the final one is what USDA calls a customer data sheet. So that's where you just give more of your personal information. So those are the four forms that you would have 60 days to turn into FSA once you apply. Okay, so I think that's the sort of top level of the main requirements. And there's just two other things I want to mention. And Stephen, I think, brought this up very briefly. But one is that ERP Phase 2, there are appeal rights for this program. And what that means is if you apply and you are denied and you think that there was a mistake and that you were eligible and you should have received a payment, there is an appeals process that you can go through in order to try to, ensure that you do get paid. And so there are appeal rights for this program, as well as equitable relief. And then finally, and there's a kind of detailed explanation of this in our ERP Phase 2 guide. But as we all know, FSA and USDA are government entities, and it's illegal for them to discriminate. And so we just want to make sure everyone is aware that USDA has a discrimination complaint process. And so if in the course of applying for ERP Phase 2, if you feel that you are being discriminated against by an FSA employee, there is an avenue if you want, or if you choose to go down, where you can submit that complaint. And again, in our guide, we kind of walk through the requirements for that process. So I think I am going to stop there, and Stephen and I will just kind of watch the chat and try to answer questions as we can.
I see Rosa's hand. Rosa, you want to unmute and ask your question? Rosa, can you hear me? I see your hand up. Did you have a question you wanted to ask? Maybe she's scratching her head. You're in class and your teacher thinks you're raising your hand, but you just end up scratching your hand.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I put something in a couple, but I may have missed some. So if you had one in the chat and you don't have an answer yet, just my suggestion would be to speak up.
I was not scratching my head. I was having a hard time with my cursor. I do have a question, and specifically, Stephen, on the linkage agreement, the agreement to get the crop insurance. Is the basic like NAP insurance, does that meet that criteria?
I'm sorry, is NAP, say again now?
The NAP, the basic NAP coverage that farmers can get, or that socially disadvantaged farmers can get where there's no cost to them. Does that meet that criteria, or do they have to get the additional?
Let me look. I don't remember. Hold on. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
It looks like there's a couple more questions from Chuko and Aaron Abeta.
Yeah, so my question is about the linkage requirement, and I understand, about the crop insurance and NAP and available, not available. I'm curious as to who is in charge of oversight, ensuring that said insurance is acquired. And what's the penalty if it isn't? Because the area where I'm representing is socioeconomically disadvantaged. Median household income in the general area, right, is about $20,000 a year for a family of four. The farmers wouldn't fall into that demographic necessarily, but the area itself is very depressed. So there could be a strain for those that have to pay for that insurance. And then,
Yeah,
of course, NAP, you mentioned, is unnecessarily complicated, which it is. That prevents yet another hurdle and obstacle for socioeconomically disadvantaged people. So my initial question is about oversight. And then my second question is there some sort of recourse for people that might need assistance paying for that insurance?
So again, this is an example of where, if you're super familiar with USDA programs and use them all the time, it's no big deal. But if it's folks like you're describing, Aaron, that can be a problem. The short answer is that you have to file an acreage report for these next 2 years. And so I think if you don't do the acreage report, then, which is going to show that, I think that will show the acreage report is required. Yeah. And I can't remember if that directly includes NAP and crop insurance, but what it at least does is lets them know what you're growing. And so then they know what it is that you need to have covered one way or the other, is with that. And I just couldn't agree more that, it's going to be tricky and hard for folks with limited resources that aren't used to dealing with the USDA. I mean, that's why they're not already in the programs, is that one way or another they decided didn't work for them. So, yeah.
And I would just add to that, if in some form FSA learns that you haven't met the linkage requirement, what the agreement says is that you're agreeing to refund the payment that you received. So I guess that would be kind of the penalty if you weren't able to, and if FSA determined that that was a violation of that agreement, you have to refund the payment.
And going back to the earlier question, what about what level of NAP coverage? All you need to get is the catastrophic, or as people will call it, 50-55. So if you get the basic minimal catastrophic NAP coverage one way or the other, that's enough, as long as it covers the crop that was the basis for your ERP2 claim.
Thank you for answering the questions.
See Mr. Chuko's hand and then Ms. Lorette.
Yes. Thank you. This is Chucho with Latino Farmers Ranchers International. My question was, correct me if I'm mistaken now, for undocumented farmers, the EIN number will suffice in order to qualify completely for all ERP Phase 2 programs, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding, right? And so the way that it gets to be a confusing little chain there. So you have to do the so-called 902. I forgot the exact name of it. And the 902 requires you to have a farm number, and the farm number, and to do that, you have to have, as you say, a tax number, but the tax number does not require that you be documented. So I think that you're exactly right, that as I read the rules, there is no restriction if you're undocumented.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo on what Don Rudy, our executive director, mentioned, there are many issues, especially for there's not it doesn't seem to be constant within the FSA or the different agencies serving our underserved farmers. There is no consistency in terms of understanding undocumented folks. qualifying for these programs and or whether they even should apply. No, and so this is something that tends to be up in the air. As I asked, engage other folks. It's not. We're out here in the Central Valley of California, and it tends to discourages a lot of the tedious process. It discourages many folks. No, but especially for the underserved farmers who are less informed and have less access to these services, understanding that there is a long history of discrimination and racism. So it just FYI, adding on to what Don Rudy mentioned, especially over here, I have some farmers like out in the Central Coast. There's some farmers that lost all their crops to the flooding out there just south of the Bay Area, San Benito County. You have some folks out in Tulare County who are also going through the stuff, and then in Fresno County, and it's just hard for them. And it continues to be something that they continue to bring up. But thank you for that answer. I think there's a lot of work to do with the undocumented communities. For us in the Central Valley, it affects us a lot because there are farmers who were farm workers and are transitioning into farming, and it's just a challenge right now. Thank you. And that was Form 92, correct, Stephen?
It's 902, I think.
Thank you.
If you look at our guide, it lists that form. I mean, it's again, you know, for people that are used to these programs, it's just like a normal thing. But it's a key one because that's what forces you to get a farm number, and you know the farm number is to get you the EIN. I mean, so if you have a question about that, I mean, FSA in theory should be happy to help you, but you know, we'd be happy if you feel like you're up against you know, a wrong interpretation. We would be very interested to hear about that and talk to you about how to approach it. So.
Yeah, that's definitely something. Thank you for sharing that. I think that there's a FSA still needs to build competency in terms of serving undocumented folks or folks who are in the process, and depending on what their status is. So many don't even understand what IEN means to undocumented folks as their ITIN number or the farmer's number. And so there's a lot of confusion. And some folks from the agency have told some of the folks that we told we serve is, well, since you're undocumented, you pretty much don't qualify. Or, you know, if you don't, you're not documented, you can't have an IEN number, which is misconception, is a lie. So I think that's something else to build competency around.
You know, I don't want to chew up all of our time here, but let me just say, when someone gets told that, I mean, they need to make their own decisions about, you know, how much they want to be, you know, out front in saying this stuff. But if they're up for it, my suggestion is to ask for that information in writing, in an email or in a letter. Let's get these people on the record that are telling folks they're not eligible, and we'll go from there, because that's just wrong. You know, and again, I mean, I get that, you know, not everybody is going to want to do that, but if they are up for it, the best way we can combat it is if people will sort of really push and be told no on the record. That's when we're most able to do something about it.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, for sure. I understand it's a long topic and definitely appreciate your space on it. Thank you.
Thank you both. Lorette and then Rudy.
Yeah, our next section is barriers, and I think we're kind of, you know, transitioning to that section, and I think probably Rudy will talk more about that. But, you know, with respect to the folks in California, I think it's really important, and I'm also thinking that we need to, you know, Rural Coalition has one of the agreements to do outreach in ERP like FLAG does, and we'll be doing more calls. And I think particularly on this section, and we might be organizing a call with FSA around this topic. But, you know, what I also want to say is, like, the atmospheric river in San Benito County and so forth was in January 2023. And this ERP program is supposed to be occurring again next year. And so part of it is doing documentation. It's not a simple way to get a really quick response. And then I think there's a bunch of other complexities. And so one of the other ones is that, we'll be focusing on like, how do the farmers need to do all these records and their crop reports and all of those kind of things. And I think a lot of times the offices do not help them with that. And so what we really try and do is like work out what are the offices that are problematic. And the other thing that we've heard repeatedly is practically all of our farmers get asked for their documentation up front, even though that's not required from other farmers. And so we're going to be probably doing some research and evaluation on that. And, if farmers have problems, just email us at farmers@ruralcode.org. We'll share the information with FLAG and others, but we take things immediately to FSA and say, look, you've got to fix that. It doesn't always get fixed very fast. And, the other thing is there's this matter of the CCC form 860. And what we know, which is basically saying that you're an underserved farmer. And I think my kind of last question to FLAG is kind of to address that, because right now, even if you don't sign up for crop insurance or NAP, you will automatically have NAP if you are an underserved farmer, a socially disadvantaged farmer, and the premium is paid if you do your crop reports. And, and so that's another thing that's really important to reach that requirement. And the other thing is, if you don't have a CCC 860 on file with your office, you should do it now, because what they've done in the CFAP and CFAP 2 is if they had any extra funds left over, they gave them first to socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers who hadn't yet received their payments. So we're going to have continual pieces, but right now it's get the application in the door. But CCC 860, we should add to the list too that you should be putting in.
And Lorette,
yeah,
may I add one thing on that? So one of the things with ERP Phase 2, they do a couple of things that are targeted specifically for socially disadvantaged, limited resource, beginning farmers, veteran farmers. One of them is that you are eligible for an increased payment factor, or payment limitation, excuse me. So the cap for the maximum amount you could receive under the program can be increased if you fall within those categories. But in order to evidence that you do, while the form is not required, you would have to submit the form. The other thing is, at the beginning when I was talking about how the payment is structured, the starting point for that ERP factor, that 70%, FSA, if they don't have enough money for this program, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but they have the discretion to lower that factor. So for example, let's say hundreds of thousands of farmers apply, they don't have a full amount. So the way they prorate the payment is by lowering that ERP factor. So instead of taking your typical year and multiplying it by 70%, maybe they would go down to 50%. But if you are a underserved farmer, if you fall into any of the categories on Form 860, they will increase that by 15%. So there's a lot of ifs here, but the maximum is always still the 70% ERP factor. But if the program ends up lowering that because they don't have enough money, it will be higher for underserved farmers. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes,
great.
it does. And it's also why you need to do the CCC 860, and then the other thing we are going to try and evaluate and share your experiences with us is how many farmers are asked for their documentation, or sometimes, and if you have any problem and you're told, oh, we don't cover this or whatever, our TA team, and maybe our TA team, you can kind of like raise your hand so that, everybody will be able to see you, but we will be walking farmers through doing these applications and, just to give you technical assistance on exactly what to do. And we'll walk through, a little more of that whole form. Like there's Jennifer and Kanisha's here and Karina's here. And I think Butch is off, his daughter's getting a PhD tomorrow, but, we have a whole team that'll be working on that. So please, make sure and, don't leave things on the table. And make sure you also get your receipt for service, anything they tell you at the office, and we'll do a little guide for that. And we want to hear about it because we want to fix it. Okay, and then, you know, I think those are kind of addressing some of the barriers, and I think Kanisha might have more to say after Rudy talks.
Rudy, you're up. I was just going to say, in the guide we tried to get into some of the details about the 860 form. So we sort of spell out what those are and what they require. So well, that's one place to look for information about that form. Rudy.
Okay, well, I think we're overlooking a great resource. I see that Mr. Juan Garcia, who has 30+ experience in dealing with, USDA, would be a great resource in terms of helping us to navigate through some of this. I don't see him now, but he was on, and I think we should take advantage of the fact that he has that experience and be able to ask him in terms of how it is that we can, he can assist us in going through some of this difficulties in dealing with the organization, with USDA. Is Mr. Garcia still on?
I don't think he is, but we'll try and get him on one of our next TA calls, Rudy.
Okay, yeah, because I think it's really important to have somebody like him who has that experience in terms of how it is that we need to deal with the USDA organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know, Tillman, were you starting to raise something? And then maybe Kanisha can say something if it's okay, if we kind of move through that, because I know there's a lot more on the call, Charlotte.
Absolutely.
Tillman, did you have a question or a thought to share?
You're muted right now.
No, I did not have a question.
Okay. All right, Kanisha, do you want to say a little bit more about what we're doing with ERP right now? And we are working in partnership with a number of the groups on here, like Cottage House and Oklahoma Black Historical. I think World Farmers is working on this too. Henrietta and Mr. Booker and Rural Advancement Fund and the National Sharecroppers Fund and Dr. Janella and Kansas Black Farmers and Compañera Campesinas. So they will be out in the field working on this. So please call in us. Go ahead, Kanisha.
And Mr. Tillman's group as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now we are just in the process of sending out an intake form. We're trying to get farmers to reach out if they need support to complete the application, and working with just starting to work with our partners. Again, this is a short turnaround time, so we don't have a lot of time to get farmers in the door. So this was really helpful to have this informational webinar. But as Lorette says, we will be working as hard as we can, not just to get farmers in the program, but working on programs after. So risk management programs will be doing education and technical assistance on taxes and finances and all these important record keeping pieces that farmers need, that hopefully will get them prepared for something in the future, if any other programs might come in the future. So once we get past this process of getting farmers in the door, we have a lot of educational pieces and technical assistance planned for farmers. But again, as Lorette says, please do reach out, share that farmers at Rural Co email if farmers encounter any challenges. We want to know that, so we can feed that back to USDA, which is also something that we have in the agreement, that there is a feedback loop. So
yeah, and we'll let Farm Aid and others know, and we'll try and make sure our TA calls get, that you can all be invited to those too. I think we all have to work together because there's so much information to go out. And we do have a training program now on training crop insurance agents and adjusters, so we really can get under the hood of how those programs actually work. And, I think, we'll keep on knowing more, but this year it's like really focusing on the farmer records. And of course, any minute now, we might be having the whole discrimination financial assistance process come out too. So Rural Coalition will be working on all of those. USDA is also working on trying to, get more people of color farmers on county committees. And that nominations process is due in August. And so there's many, many ways to get farmers more involved. And if you're interested in any of those things, let us know. Kanisha will put her name in there. But right now, let's get all the applications in the door that you can.
Thank you, Lorette. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Take the money now because Congress is getting busy trying to rescind everything. So
That part.
Hi, everyone. This is Savvy from Land Loss Prevention Project. I'm having technological challenges, so I've been listening by phone, and we're planning to continue to work with the Rural Coalition as a member org and board member, and Operation Spring Plant, and the group of African Americans being led by Archie Hart at North Carolina Department of Ag will be working with us to do outreach around the ERP, and we'll try collectively to get some applications in.
Thank you, Savvy.
Sure.
Additional questions? I just want to note that there's been quite a few resources dropped in the chat, including Flag's guide, the Dusty guide that they referenced. Also, someone shouted out some of the resources from Raffi as well. So those links are in the chat. Yeah. No one has any questions. I'm gonna pass it back to Stephen to maybe talk about more about entry points.
I think that we've actually probably already kind of discussed it. The only thing that I would say is that this program requires you to enter into the world of FSA. And so that means this sort of farm report that we were talking about, the 902 form. If you don't want to be a part of USDA, you actually just shouldn't do the program. I mean, and there are people that don't want to. And what's tricky here is that this is a population of people that didn't have crop insurance, or they would have probably done ERP1. So, I just feel like, it's kind of up to everybody to decide if they want to stick their toe into USDA programs. But if they do, if they are thinking about it, this might be a decent program to try to do it.
Thank you. I want to give our other partner organizations an opportunity just to chime in and share a few words. If there's no other questions, just know that these folks who we've invited to join us today, or actually who invited us in to join them in this effort, are available to us. So I just want to make sure I share my appreciation to them for making the time and space, and for thinking of Farm Aid to help participate in getting the word out and the outreach out, which feels really, really important. So anyone from NSAC want to chime in? Maybe Billy, say a few words before we round this out, and then I'll pass it on to our other partners at National Family Farm Coalition to add anything they'd like to add as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you to Stephen and to Lindsay for sharing all this knowledge. Thank you to Lorette and everyone who's been working on this. I'm Billy with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and I just wanted to do a quick plug that we're collecting feedback to share with FSA directly on how this program is working. You know, a little bit more context about where it came from. Folks in FSA, in the administration right now are very conscious that most disaster money goes to the largest and wealthiest commodity farms. And so this ERP Phase 2 was a very intentional effort to bridge that gap and put resources in the hands of farmers who don't traditionally have crop insurance, and thus the folks who are left out when a disaster strikes. And so that was the intent of the program. And of course, there's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of layers to that. And Stephen and Lindsay and all the insights shared here should be your guide to whether or not you participate. But for those of you who do, I have a survey that I would really love for you that I just linked in the chat to take as a farmer who's using this program, or if you're a farm organization or advocate on this group, if you can share it, if you can provide your own insights. Again, the administrator of FSA, Zach Ducheneau, is looking for feedback, and a lot of the commodity groups are aligning against ERP Phase 2 from the perspective of, you know, we did not get this pot of money, but we should have, even though they always receive much more than is necessary. So already Congress is getting a lot of pressure to never do this again, and to, move away from the model they're trying to pilot. And so maybe this wasn't the best way, maybe there can be tweaks and we need to hear all of that, but the intention of FSA was to get money into the hands of farmers who are always left out. And so they're looking for that feedback. And through this informal survey, I'm trying to collect that and share it with them, and connect them to any farmers who might be willing to speak more to it as well. So that's just a quick plug for the link that I've included in the chat, but thank you all for your work on this.
Thank you, Billy.
May I ask a quick question to Billy?
For sure. Mm-hmm.
And Billy, thank you for your solidarity and sharing that form. Now, would it be better to answer as a farmer or as a member of an organization? And what would you say?
Really, I'm looking for farmer experiences the most, right? So have you gone through this, and what were the challenges you faced? Did this work for you? Did you get the money? And how did that impact your operation? Did it really help you, come back from a loss or put more money in your pocket this year? That was important. All those farmer experiences are probably the most valuable, but definitely, if you as an advocate are kind of, a liaison to farmers who can speak broadly to experiences that you're seeing farmers that you're connected to have with the program, that's valuable too.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jordan, did you have anything you want to add on behalf of?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Appreciate so much to the time and expertise that Stephen and Lindsay and FarmAid have lent to this space. My name is Jordan Treacle. I'm with the National Family Farm Coalition. And the only thing I just wanted to add is just sort of boost the message that you've heard from Billy and Lorette and some of the other organizations that are doing the policy advocacy work that relates to this, and that so NFFC, we don't provide technical assistance in helping farmers navigate these programs like some of the other organizations here, but your perspectives and the questions and experiences that you bring to this space and filling out these forms like the one that Billy just mentioned helps us inform how we engage both with USDA, but also how we engage with Congress in trying to provide oversight in making these programs work and serve you all better. And this is a very contentious farm bill year. And so I know it's a lot to ask for y'all to engage in providing these, these insights into these surveys and bringing these experiences to these calls in the evening, but just want to thank you for that, and encourage you all to, continue to reach out to us to try to provide those experiences. For NFFC particularly, we're interested in things related to access to credit at FSA, and the NAD appeals process that Lindsay mentioned. So instances where folks are being denied or not supported in that process are really insightful in how we try to make these programs better. So just want to thank you all for your time, and thanks to FarmAid for putting this event on.
Thank y'all. Thank you. So thank you all for joining. I just want to just in terms of follow-up and the ways that we're gonna keep in touch. You can expect a follow-up email from us that will include a link to this webinar recording and also a list of some of those resources that you just saw in the chat. So we'll make sure we compile those. I see folks are asking for those, so we'll make sure that all that is included. Anything else from our speakers before we wrap?
Future had a question.
Thank you, Aaron. Mr. Don Rudy, he asked the question if Billy would be able to share that survey to others, folks who were not able to make it to our webinar today.
Yeah, I just want to make sure because, you know, being on the chat is one thing, but being able to get the survey link, you know, we need to send it out so that our folks will respond to that.
Thank you, Rudy. Yeah, that's a great question, a great call. And it looks like Charlotte responded in the chat that we will, or that FarmAid will send out the survey link in a follow-up email to all of the folks.
Yeah, we appreciate that because, you know, we also have indigenous communities, for instance, in the Midwest that don't speak Spanish. And so we're dealing with a situation in which some of those very complex issues that you're bringing up, and we have to, you know, we're all volunteers at this moment. I mean, we're volunteers, so we don't have the resources or the staff capacity to be able to deal with a lot of the, you know, elements that you are dealing with as organizations that or have resources to work with. I mean, we're doing the work. It's just that we just don't have the capacity that we need in order to be able to deal with, especially in the language area. Some of our folks don't even, I mean, they have flip phones. They don't know how to use a computer. Those are issues that most of you that are on this calls don't have to deal with. We're like in a kindergarten with some of our folks. That level of it's a high bar for them to be able to reach the complexity of some of these programs that USDA has. So I appreciate you know, you inviting us to be participants in this you know, workshops, because it allows us to be able to develop the resources that we need to be able to deal with those communities that they don't know that USDA, what USDA is, and or the programs. Very, very elementary. Okay, so thank you very much for your assistance in this.
That, thank you to you. Your experiences are the most valuable piece of this puzzle. Thank you.
Well, like I said, and let's not forget about Mr. Garcia, because Mr. Garcia has tremendous amount. I mean, he's worked for the organization for 31 years or something like that. And it is important to bring him in to help us to deal with some of this. I mean, he has a wealth of knowledge about the organization that he worked with for that long, and he could be very helpful to us. We just need to ask him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudy.
And I just want to share something that has been coming up, just an FYI. I understand that it's that we're in a deadline kind of stuff with all this stuff, but it's also not just that farmers themselves are not engaging because of X reasons. It's also that we have within some folks in the agencies that we work with who work with farmers, and then even allies, NGOs who believe that the Farm Bill is not enough, right? And that we're overwhelmed at capacity, but then folks are adding that we're just throwing money at the problem and it's not being efficient. So I don't know how constructive that those remarks are, especially when it's with the political times that we are going in, especially as Congress is trying to defund these opportunities and we're rushing to make the advantage. So just FYI, that's something that's going on in the underwaters, I guess.
Yeah, I see Mr. Garcia has joined us again, so maybe we could, some of you could, you know, maybe he can address some of the issues that we have dealing with USDA with FSA. Mr. Garcia.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to cut off for a little while. What can I help you with?
Well, we're dealing with FSA as and you have had a you know, a wealth of experience in terms of navigating some of those issues, and we would love to see you provided with some guidance with regard to accessing some of the programs and some of the difficulties that you yourself have experienced in helping the small, especially the small producers.
Well, Rudy, I mean, I don't know if you want, I mean, there's so many programs. If you have something in specific, but you know, what I do want to say is that many times, you know, it's real important for organizations like Rural Coalition, an organization that you have, Rudy, and others, to help USDA or FSA with outreach to, you know, for these farmers. I know a gentleman, I think is from California, has mentioned a lot of really important things, but it's really important for you all as organizations to help and to have knowledge of the programs, you know, good general knowledge, and explain to the producers, you know, what they need to have, you know, as far as eligibility, do you have to be a US citizen? Do you have to be a non-resident alien? Do you have to be a qualified alien? You know, like in the loan program, for example, those are three eligibility requirements to get a loan. So, you know, it's difficult. These programs are complicated. Sometimes there's not much time, you know, for the sign-up period. And for right now, look, you've got 2 weeks left, right? So you've got to get the word out. FSA has to also scramble to get all these applications in the system and then figure out how much money they can pay. So I don't know. I mean, if you have something in specific that I can address, I'm just addressing something in general. Just got caught kind of off guard a little bit, but.
Well, I mean, you know, you've been listening to some of the concerns that we have, you know, the language issue, the, for instance, and as you mentioned, the undocumented status of some of the, I mean, we're doing the outreach, we're doing you know, we have volunteers out in the community doing this work and trying to bring those issues that you just mentioned to their attention, and trying to hold their hand as we provide them with the information and the eligibility criteria. You know, we're not, you know, because we don't want to raise expectations, then we go to the office and they're not eligible. You know, we have to do the you know, eligibility intake as volunteers in the community, so that we do not raise unnecessary, you know, expectations that then we are not able to meet. So we're doing that we are doing that already. But you know, you have certain knowledge. For instance, in our ERP too, you know, this is something that is relatively new to our community, and if you have some, you know, something to contribute to that, I mean, we would be very grateful with regard to your expertise.
Well, you know, as was mentioned early in the call, you know, just about every crop is eligible, you know, for this program. as was mentioned, the ERP1 mainly addressed your commodity crops, you know, cotton, grain, sorghum, corn, etc., soybeans. And now this second phase addresses just about every crop that there is, except, like I said, livestock and grazing crops. So the applications, the fact sheets, everything is in Spanish, in the Spanish language, that producers can review the application itself. So they've done a lot of good work as far as translating a lot of these forms, where producers that have limited English proficiency can read and understand, right? So it's just important to explain to the producers. Now, the other thing, if they're not filing an income tax form, there's not a requirement that the income tax form Schedule F be utilized for this program. But as was mentioned by, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, that they are supposed to have the information available if requested. Now, FSA should have a good reason to request the information, not just because, you know, okay, it's a new producer and okay, we want to make sure that they're putting the right they're entering the right information on the form. I don't want to get into a lot of there, but they should have a good reason, not just to pick and choose. Now, the one thing that I do have to say is that maybe eventually, as other programs that FSA administers, that there may be spot checks, right? That someone may fall under a spot check that you have to provide the information. As far as the linkage requirement is concerned, you know, there's not really an oversight as to, you know, producers that have completed linkage, but USDA or FSA may come later and do a process to make sure that producers did meet that receive benefits under ERP did meet the linkage requirements, say especially with the NAP coverage. And under the NAP coverage, if you're an SDA producer, you do not have to, you know, purchase a coverage. You have a CCC 860 that makes you automatically eligible. Now, as Lorette mentioned before I disconnected, was that you do have to file an acreage report in order to have coverage for NAP. So, Rudy, those are, I think, some of the really important things that I think you all need to consider as you're helping these producers submit their applications and providing the information that's needed. And as was mentioned, you know, I thought there was maybe a little confusion by that gentleman, and I'm not saying he was confused, but he mentioned an EIN number, and that's usually called an employer identification number, like for a corporation or whatever. But I think I know what he's talking about as far as the undocumented. The 902 form, CCC 902 form, is a farm operating plan that producers must fill out. So you have 60 days to provide that information. So if you don't have a farm number, FSA needs to establish a farm number so that the highly erodible land, that AD 1026, you know, form has to be filled out. So you have to have a farm number, you know, with the land located to be able to certify that you're not farming highly erodible land. Those are just some of the things that I heard while I was listening. And, you know, some really good explanations that were given too. So.
Well, thank you so much for chiming in, Mr. Garcia. Your expertise is much needed and greatly valued. And I think Lorette mentioned that she's going to be calling you back in and possibly connecting more. I want to be mindful of time and once again, just thank all of you for taking the time to be here. And please look out for that follow-up information, which will include ways to get any kind of technical assistance you may require. And you'll also get a recording of this so you can revisit any of these conversations that have been had so far. I want to make sure I thank Carmen, who's on our back end providing interpretation services. And again, thank you to all our partners. And happy applying. You got this, and we keep on their neck for sure.
I want to add one quick final point.
Please, Stephen, and I'll let you close us out.
Yes, sorry. So Lindsay and I have been talking here, trying to make sure we're exactly accurate. So the 902 form and the farm number and the tax identification number, that does not require you to be documented. But we've just looked closely again, and we think that actually for this particular program, you do have to be documented. And so and I think that I think that I overstated earlier, because I think I said that that's not true. And so we know, for example, on some of these programs, you are eligible, even if you're undocumented, but we think that with ERP2 that there's a specific thing that says that you need to be either a citizen or a resident alien. So I apologize. I think that I misspoke there.
Thank you, Stephen. That's an important redirect. So we do have access to each other. So if there's any additional follow-up that needs to happen, you're in the right place. You met the right folks in order to do that. So thank you for that correction, Stephen. That's important for sure. And thank everybody so much for joining. Look out for an email from me on behalf of all of us. And I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.